And we are live. Welcome, everybody, to the Post Wrestling Post Office.
It is the Café Hangout. I'm John Pollock alongside Wai Ting. I want to thank everyone that is joining us live in the chat room to listen wherever you are across the world tuning in. It's a rather big edition of the Café Hangout, literally our biggest ever, because we are going to be joined by three guests. How are we going to pull this off, Wai? We have never had three guests at once. Well, we're not going to have them simultaneously, but spread out throughout the next hour.
Yeah, we're going to try to space everybody, but give everybody enough time. At the same time, hopefully giving enough time for some of our callers on the show as well. But maybe on this particular episode, maybe a little bit less time for calls, but we'll try to squeeze them in as
We
well.
will get to calls. So hang tight. We're going to be joined by Damian Abraham, host of The Wrestlers. Episode 2 aired on Viceland on Wednesday night. It was the MVP episode. So Damian will stop by to talk about that particular episode and what went into producing that one. We're also going to hear from Sebastian Suave of Smash Wrestling. They had a big announcement on Wednesday regarding a partnership with OWE out of China and running a series of shows during SummerSlam week, which is the most insane week in the history of Toronto wrestling.
I think you could justifiably say that. Yes.
This is like a low-key WrestleMania week that Toronto is now getting with all of these shows, OWE being added to the mix. But up first, really lucky to have this guy on, joining us off the top. If you are a follower of any version of combat sports in the boxing world, MMA, professional wrestling, you are familiar with him. Andreas Hale, senior editor at Sporting News, as well as co-host of the Corner podcast. Pleasure to have Andreas Hale, who was quite the newsmaker this past weekend, covering Starrcast in Las Vegas. Andreas, you are now in New York, I understand. Is it somewhat of an adjustment? Because I would often go through this where suddenly you are in the thick of things covering professional wrestling, and then you're flipping over to, whether it's an MMA event, in this case for you, boxing, that here are all these versions that are kind of under a similar umbrella, but very, very different, I would imagine, going from Las Vegas to New York this week. Yeah, tell us a little bit about just being there. I mean, it was one thing to watch it at home, and this event came off. It just seemed like it was a real home run effort from the company on Saturday night. But being there for the time you were, that people are still there is a palpable buzz this many days removed.
That didn't have the buzz that this had. Over at the MGM, there was a ton of signage, there were a ton of people. The line was ridiculous to get a double or nothing. And it was nothing that I think the MGM has ever experienced in terms of pro wrestling. We've had a few wrestling events in Vegas. WCW used to come to town pretty often. We'd have some smaller shows. We have FSW, of course, but there was nothing like this. This like a mini WrestleMania weekend. If that's how it had to be succinct about it, that's it.
And interesting as well, taking a weekend that the UFC had kind of really put their stamp on going back to 2006, that Memorial Day. That was the UFC was able to, kind of put their stamp on Las Vegas that weekend. And now they've slowly moved away from that weekend. And here is All Elite Wrestling that was able to go into a city that, let's be honest, is not a wrestling hotbed and really make it theirs this past weekend. I just think it was a real statement for this company to go in on a holiday weekend and just kind of dominate a major tourist section of the country in Las Vegas.
I mean, not to mention it's Memorial Day weekend, which is, big party time in Vegas. So you had the weirdest classic cultures. You had bikinis and bathing suits. You had old people that spent all their money and was wandering the streets gambling. And you had the pro wrestling fans. They all kind of commingled in this odd space on the Las Vegas Strip. It was a sight to behold. But it was the first time in a long time that I've seen pro wrestling in Vegas really mean something. And it wasn't just, confined to the MGM. Obviously, we had Starrcast II Palace, which is about a block away. Tuscany Suites hosted there, the live podcast, the podcast movement stage. It was a lot, man. I really felt like for the first time in a long time that wrestling was very significant in Vegas.
Speaking about Starrcast, you put together what I thought was a really essential panel that I hope a lot of people go and check out, that you guys have put up now on your podcast feed. It's also on YouTube. Tell me just a bit about the panel itself and where the idea came from to put together a panel and discussing, different groups within professional wrestling that are either misrepresented or not represented at all. I found it to be really a fascinating hour-long discussion you guys had.
Yeah, so it was called Wrestling with Stereotypes, a conversation about race, gender, and minority representation in pro wrestling. Being an African-American male, as a wrestling fan, I've always, I grew up with the Bobo Brazils and the Junkyard Dogs and the Crime Times and MVP, and they never sat at the top. And then when you looked at the women, you never saw, until just recently, the women's revolution. So between Kofi Kingston winning at WrestleMania and Becky Lynch headlining WrestleMania with Ronda Rousey in Charlotte, it seemed like the right time. And this came to fruition before WrestleMania was even, those matches were even announced. But the idea was just to kind of bring these underrepresented people together. Probably we had Kenny King, Willie Mack, Kazim Famutier he was a former WWE writer. We had Chris Bay, local wrestler, and Marty Bell, who was on TNA, was in CWC. And we all just had this conversation about, our experience as minorities, as fans, behind the scenes, as talent in pro wrestling. It's the first of many. Last Starrcast, what I told Conrad was, you guys didn't have any melanin out there, so we need to have some melanin representation. We need to discuss this because it's a very important segment of pro wrestling. We're not just fans. We're not just here to do the job. We're really, taking hold of this culture, and these cultural discussions need to happen. So hopefully this is just one of many conversations that I have moving forward in the future.
Was this something that you've been planning on doing for a while, or was it just something that you wanted to do for this particular Starrcast?
No, this is something I've talked about for a while. Being a writer in the space of combat sports, I came to find out there wasn't many African-American writers in any of these spaces. So that really got me to thinking that, there are a few small pockets, but then it got me thinking of talent. So when I talk to talent, it'd be a little bit different. Or when I talk to an African-American boxer, they would converse with me a little bit different. Or African-American wrestlers or any minority wrestler, they would converse with me a little bit different. And we'd have these conversations about our experiences. How whether it was being booed or whether it was difficult. I've been mistaken for a fighter on numerous occasions. They wouldn't let me in as a do an interview. So it's our experiences. So that's where this thing, combat sport.
Sorry, Andres, you're breaking up. You're breaking up just a little bit on our end. Hopefully, this is something that'll maybe fix itself. But do you mind just repeating your thought?
Yeah. I'll say it again. I mean, it was something that I've wanted to do for a long time because minorities don't represent a big contingent of journalism in combat sports. And African-American male like myself felt like this conversation needed to be had a long time ago. So I've been waiting for the opportunity to bring this together. So this is not really something that just kind of popped up into my head. This is something I've been thinking about for at least 10 years to start having these conversations. And now the opportunity came up, and I want to take full advantage of it.
I found it to be really interesting, some of the firsthand experiences people had on the panel. You had Marty Bell talking about at the beginning of her career being told to straighten out your hair, and just examples that are maybe not even examples of like what someone would necessarily define as out and out racism, but just these embedded beliefs that I need to look a certain way to assimilate into this particular environment, and these things that have just gone unchecked for so long that it's kind of just it's embedded, and it's something that by discussing it, you're getting this stuff out into the open of just the thought process that minorities may have of having to adjust their way of living to fit into this what has been a very white dominated industry for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's the reason kind of why we had Cass up there, because we had to show some examples of what pro wrestlers have had to deal with in the WWE in terms of writing promos for minority talent. It's Cass, he's an African-American. He was just one, and he would write for the New Day. Of course, he wrote for Kevin Owens and a few other people. But he would run into these situations where he would see white writers tell, Willie Mack or Kenny King when they were in other companies to say a certain thing that it would never come out of our mouth. It would never be part of our experience. So it is a thing about assimilation and a part of losing our culture, especially for the talent. Once they get into the WWE or some of these other promotions, that people don't really understand our struggles and who we are. So it's important that we have those conversations to let people know, like, it's not out and out racism. It's kind of racial insensitivity. And, we wanted to expand not just with African Americans and women, as far as Asian Americans, Asians, Latino community. Like, everybody has their own struggle inside of this. So I think this is the start of a conversation, and hope we can keep the ball rolling because we've been underrepresented for a long time.
Why do you think, Andreas, it's taken wrestling so much longer than many other art forms that are out there to have these discussions?
It's kind of crazy because, like, when you think of the WWE back in the day, back in the WWF days, or you can go further back, it's always been about exaggerated stereotypes. And the easy ones to grasp onto for minorities are these ones that are out and out racist. And as years pass, we kind of got a little bit more lenient on it. But when it comes to, white American culture, the stereotypes that are out and out are more like vanity. They're more three-dimensional stereotypes. But I think because we haven't made up a huge contingency of the writers or the promoters, I'm not saying Vince is a racist. I'm just saying he hasn't dealt with our experiences.
Right.
So I think that's part of the issue is that we haven't had anybody there to speak for us behind the scenes, behind the curtain in guerrilla for years. So hopefully that's going to change and inspire a bunch of young people who may not be professional wrestlers that, hey, maybe I need to get on the creative process because that is very important.
Do you feel like the WWE has, taken any strides, significant strides towards addressing a lot of these issues currently on their TV? Obviously, you had somebody like Kaz talking about working with the New Day. We're seeing what's going on with Kofi right now. How would you kind of assess how the WWE is doing in 2019?
I'll tell you what has been better. Obviously, Kofi being champion wasn't something they planned. It happened organically. I think Vince and company have seen that, there is – you don't have to be, the African Americans don't have to be heels to be stars in WWE. So you look at guys like Ricochet or Cedric Alexander. Obviously, we know, like, a lot of these guys are getting buried because there's so much talent that WWE currently has. But with the women's, revolution, evolution, whatever the hell you want to call it, with Becky sitting on top, with Kofi being champion, I think it's being booked pretty well as a fighting champion. You rarely have a champion babyface who's African American sitting on top of the company. So I'll say that they're making great strides in that direction. It's just something that it took a very long time to get to, and hopefully it's a sign of the times that race doesn't really matter. That anybody who's a good worker can be a champion.
So, I mean, you had to really appreciate the fact, Andreas, that here you went into Starrcast with this idea of really opening up this conversation within the wrestling community, and I doubt you could have forecasted what would be coming out of this weekend when you put up the clip of Cody in the media scrum addressing, like, these very issues, and then Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez retweets this, which I cannot imagine what your Twitter feed has been like the last couple of days, and this becomes a much larger conversation at a greater level coming out of this weekend that I found it really intriguing that here that this tied right into your panel. And now a lot more people were talking about this coming out of the weekend, specific to Cody's comments.
Yeah, and that's kind of part of the issue with being an African-American journalist. Like, sitting in and seeing Cody make those comments about how he told Brandy Rhodes that he didn't see race, and then Brandy said, "Well, you don't see my struggle," and nobody really picked up on that. And that was the thing that I immediately picked up on in the clip that I wanted to put out. And when I put it out, I didn't think it would take off like it did. But obviously, a lot of people feel the same way because being colorblind is not the American way. The real American way is to recognize other people's struggles and acknowledge them and empathize with them. So when I put up the clip, I was like, okay, cool. I looked at my Twitter feed, and then all of a sudden, the video has 10,000, 50,000. And then Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez retweets it, and then it goes mad. And the great thing is a lot of wrestlers have DM'd me wanting to continue this conversation. Interestingly enough, fans of pro wrestling who are celebrities, the Wale's of the world, they've been interested in having these conversations. So I'm thankful that it did take off the way that it did. I couldn't ask for a better situation, but dude, my mentions were in shambles. Between the people that were truly supportive, then you had like the super Trump fans who were like, keep politics out of my wrestling. Like, I haven't been able to actively look at my mentions in Twitter for like 3 days because it's just crowded with junk.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because I cannot imagine a section right now of of online culture beyond politics that would be such a cesspool of comments that I'm sure you've been exposed to a greater degree than any of us could possibly appreciate?
Dude, it's, my mentions in general, because a lot of people don't really understand, my mentions in general get filled with the most nonsensical stuff from me covering cultural angles in pro wrestling, boxing, and MMA. But when this thing took off, man, the right-wingers came out, were upset. They were not happy about this because AOC is a big target anyway. She's on Fox News getting torn to shreds every day. So when this happened, it was just an excuse for it to fill it up and kind of tear it apart. So, you take the good with the bad. I'm glad it's getting a lot of attention. But obviously, there were people that were unhappy with this. But you know what I'm saying? Like, sorry for you guys. Like, these conversations have to be had.
I just to follow up on that, you mentioned like the day-to-day comments that you'll receive when it's not even, something gigantic like that AOC retweet is like tell me a bit about just kind of your experiences as a black journalist, something that I cannot possibly understand, and kind of the comments you get. Let's be specific to like the pro wrestling community and the kind of feedback you get. Is this something like racially charged comments that come your way? Is that the exception to the rule, or is that something that is a day-to-day process for you that you're seeing ignorant comments thrown at your way?
I won't say it's day-to-day, but I would say it's more than you'd anticipate.
Wow.
There's a lot of hate that fills up into my comments. Just if I make a comment about anything racial in wrestling, and not even in a negative thing, just like I asked the other day where Cedric Alexander was, and he was chasing the 24/7 title, and somebody was like, they was like, well, can't you be satisfied with anything? You got R-Truth as a champion. I was like, Jesus Christ, really? Like, and it just became, and then it was just a follow-up after that.
Wow.
Like, here you go race baiting, and here you go bringing this up, and why don't you stick to combat MMA or pro wrestling? Like, it happens every day. And if I bring up anything, like Kofi being champion, the whole Kofi Mania thing, I don't know if you guys saw, but after WrestleMania, I asked people for the reaction videos to Kofi winning the title.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it became this thing where Cesaro, Big E, and a bunch of guys sent out the same, retweeted my tweet, and I started with like 100, but I ended up getting thousands of responses from across the globe, not just from black people, not just from African Americans, but I got people from the Philippines, people from Chile, and we put together a video, a highlight package of people reacting in tears to Kofi's title. The responses to that video were, of course, it was tremendous praise, but there was responses that were like, I can't believe you people are acting like this.
Ugh.
And now I was just like, this is disgusting. That it brings out the worst in people. Why are you crying? Like, people ask, why are you crying? Well, my thing is we haven't ever seen an African American babyface hold the company's longest tenured championship. That means something to me. But other people was like, this is ridiculous. Kofi's just a coon. Somebody said that. Or Kofi's an Uncle Tom. And this is what I have to deal with the day to day. Maybe not every single day, but whenever I comment on pro wrestling and culture, this tends to come up.
It's obviously it's disgusting that you're have to deal with that kind of just rhetoric that's thrown out there. Just as we wrap up here, as we speak, Kofi Kingston, they've just released a video of him landing in Ghana and just the hero's welcome that he has received there. How would you assess 2 months in with Kofi Kingston in this position right now, and what the company essentially backdoored into that? I think even the biggest optimist the week of WrestleMania going in could not have imagined what the reception that you got to see firsthand and that everyone has kind of seen in Kofi Kingston, just this beloved figure that was not in any of these plans, and yet we look at the result now of what they have on their hands here with Kofi.
Yeah, I mean, for years, Kofi's been a guy who's been overlooked as, 11 years without a major shot at the title. And him going into WrestleMania, a lot of us thought, especially, a lot of black folks, we all said the same thing. He's going to get Triple H. He's going to the Triple H Booker T finish, because that was our one moment that we got really excited, and we one pedigree and a quick 1, 2, 3, and it was a wrap. So we didn't go in there with high hopes. So to see it happen, and the outpouring of support beforehand, 2 days before Wale held Wale Mania, and a tremendous amount of people from the community showed up in support of Kofi. I think Shad and JTG were holding him on his shoulders. We were all hoping he'd win. And to see that he not only won, but didn't immediately drop the title, that was our next concern, is that he's just going to job out to Kevin Owens like in the next 2 weeks. That didn't happen. He's going to the Superstar Showdown, whatever the hell it is, in Saudi Arabia, to face Dolph Ziggler. And he's probably going to come out with that. But for him to be able to go to Ghana and to connect with people as a babyface, as this hardworking champion, it means a lot. I mean, we couldn't imagine 10 years ago. There's no way I could imagine this. But now that it's here, it's great to see. And diversity matters. Representation matters. It's good to see our faces in spaces that we're not used to.
What I would say, I would ask Andreas, at what point could you see similar stories being told for other minorities and other cultures that are currently underrepresented in the WWE?
I'm sorry, say that again, Wayne?
Just when could you see similar stories being told for other cultures that are underrepresented in the WWE?
I mean, listen, we got Shinsuke Nakamura has been completely buried in the WWE when it has a complete history in New Japan. Now, obviously, I know they don't want to give too much shine to New Japan, but, you know, Shinsuke was a guy with so much charisma that I think it would be excellent to really tell his story of who he is. And I think it's something that a community, not just the Asian community, but everybody can connect to, because we all had our struggles. You look at a guy like Nakamura, you look at a guy like Rusev, you look at some of the women talent, you look at Naomi, obviously, who, you know, were more than athletes. You know, for a lot of years, we see, you know, look at Asuka. I know the Kabuki Warriors isn't the greatest name, but there's some history behind it. So let's tell these stories. There's a way that we can tell the stories that fans can connect to and appreciate. And it's a lot of lazy storytelling in WWE across the board. But if they got a little bit more personal with the network and really connected with some of these people's upbringing and how they got to where they are today, I think we'd all be a little bit more satisfied with the process.
For more of Andreas's work, definitely go check out all of his work. You can find at The Sporting News. He'll be covering the Anthony Joshua fight coming up this weekend. And follow him at Andreas Hale, and the Corner Podcast with Andreas and Kel Dansby drops each week. SoundCloud.com/The Corner Pod. And I definitely recommend everyone go check out the Starrcast panel that they have up there. Andreas, hope we can have you on sometime in the future. And it was really great of you to stop by and chat with us today.
Oh, absolutely, man. I listen to you guys all the time. So, you know, getting the call from you, John, I appreciate it, and I love to be back.
Anytime. Open invite. Thanks a lot, Andreas. Enjoy the weekend in New York.
No problem. Thanks.
All right. That was Andreas Hale joining us. I thought, again, I really enjoyed their panel discussion. I thought it was probably the most intriguing panel of the weekend that was out there for people to check, talking about significant issues within the industry that I think I would like to see more of these issues kind of discussed in this kind of a format.
We actually have it linked in our description, so if you want to go check it out, just do that.
All right. So momentarily we're going to be joined by Sebastian Suave of Smash Wrestling. They have partnered up with OWE for a series of shows that are going to be coming up SummerSlam week. Wait, have you decided what you're going to be doing SummerSlam week? Because it starts on Wednesday now.
I think I'm simply looking to just get a grasp of what is exactly going on right now. But just even with the offerings that Smash seems to be having right now, I feel like my schedule will be very full. And I'll be very curious to see how this person holds up by the end of the week. Sebastian, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you very much.
Sebastian, I'm not going to lie. As we are getting closer and closer to SummerSlam weekend, it is absolutely daunting this week. I think it is going to be the busiest week in the history of professional wrestling in this city.
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, there's a lot of people joining the party that I've already promoted, and there's the possibility of more to come. I mean, I know there was a lot of reservations by certain groups, but I think once there's more parties involved, there's more optimism for the traveling fan.
Well, I definitely want to talk about that week, and we'll get into the shows coming up this weekend. But the announcement came on Wednesday of you guys are partnering up with OWE out of China. They're going to be doing 2 shows during that week on the Wednesday and Saturday here in Toronto at the Met, which is home base for all of your shows that are going on. Tell us a bit about where this relationship started with OWE, that I think that there is so much curiosity to see more from this group, especially live for those that will be in Toronto that week.
Absolutely. I think the foundation of my goals for SummerSlam weekend really come down to what you just said. You said especially live. And if you see the groups that we brought in, there's a lot of groups that we have good rapport with, relationships with in Canada and the U.S. But through the successes and the failures of other groups during during WrestleMania weekend, or other particular big wrestling weekends, quality is always there, but there's always a saturation or the potential for saturation. And what it comes down to is what is truly different live. And despite the great relationships we've had, it was more challenging. It required more patience, but we went after Progress Wrestling out of the UK, WXW out of Germany, and OWE out of China. And if you even look at the all-women's collaboration we have for the summit, a wrestling fan has never seen Shimmer and Rise and Femme Fatale and Smash Wrestling, 4 premier women's brands, getting together. And if I'm not mistaken, Shimmer and Rise have never been to Toronto, let alone Canada. And even if Femme has been to Toronto, it's either their debut or it's not something you get to see every month or every year. So all these groups we brought in, we went for quality over quantity. And the reality is, outside of when we've brought in Progress, people in Canada or in a lot of North American markets have not had the opportunity to see Progress live. This will be a very rare opportunity to see WXW live. OWE is the same thing. They just created their buzz, and they're such a unique take on seeing something that you haven't seen before, because it's not something like Progress, or if you followed online, it's these guys are blowing up out of nowhere, and before you can even digest who they are and what they're about, you're hearing about their partnership with AEW. You're hearing about the Unreal production and their expansions, and how some of these talents may be the next best thing. And even for us, we're so intrigued, and we're on the technically as insiders in the industry, we're trying to digest everything, and new information and impressions are popping up with us. So really, that's what it comes down to. The effort I wanted to put towards SummerSlam weekend was to offer something that you just can't see any week or month. I mean, nothing against any other large promotions that come in, let's say Ring of Honor or others. You're going to get an incredible A-plus product. But you see them twice a year in Toronto, and hope our efforts this weekend is to give you something that you probably won't see potentially in a decade or so live. And OWE took a little more patience, but they are the embodiment of seeing something, just not talent, but a style, and everything about them. It's different, and that will be refreshing for a lot of people, I think.
Can you perhaps elaborate on what makes that product and that style so distinct for people who have not seen a whole OWE show? And maybe, I'm sure I'm going to be missing out on some stuff, but they essentially started training a bunch of kids who were 17 years old 2 years ago. I forgot what number they started, but almost like 250, 300 people, and here they are with whatever the number is, the final 20 or 30 or 40. So you have these kids who are training full-time, who are young, who are... Oh, okay. We've lost Sebastian. We will call
Reconnect.
him back quickly. But,
So yeah, among the promotions that Sebastian was mentioning, there's going to be a Smash versus Progress show on Wednesday, August the 7th, and earlier that day will be the first OWE show that's taking place, and then WXW has a Thursday afternoon slot. Progress will have its own show Thursday evening. All of this again at the Midtown Event Center. Then WXW on Friday afternoon. Super Showdown, which is one of Smash's big events of the year, is going to be Friday night. And then the Summit takes place on Saturday, and that's going to feature talent from Shimmer, from Rise, as well as Femme Fatale. So all of these different promotions under this umbrella over the weekend taking place at the Met, with OWE added to the mix. And we have reconnected with Sebastian, and we were just
There we go.
we were just talking a bit about
sorry, our fault.
kind of those that have never seen OWE before, and what
Yeah.
kind of unique flavor they've been able to introduce to the wrestling landscape.
So again, you're going to see a bunch of young kids who've been training, despite how young they are. This is all they're doing on full-time hours as a living since they're 17. And here's the best of the best that have survived. There's a martial arts kung fu style. OWE and the people behind it are very interested in showcasing something that speaks on the history and the roots of the Chinese culture, and a lot of the kung fu, a lot of characters are going to be driven off parts of their culture and history, and at the same time, there's small elements like to start a show. They literally give you, as the audience, a 101 of what you're about to see. So not everyone may be an educated crowd. They're literally going to tell you this is what it's going to happen. This is what you can expect to do as an audience. They're giving you a tutorial, which to us North American fans it could be mind blowing, or you might love or hate that take, but it's something so refreshing. And if I'm not mistaken, they also have an announcer who kind of speaks live during the show. I'm not sure if it's exactly commentary, but they're hyping up the crowd during the show. And if anyone just YouTube's, they're showing on one of those reality-based programs that's kind of like where you go do a performance from judges. They blew them away, and you get a small grasp of the kung fu style they present. And the great thing is their roster is starting to incorporate some Taiwanese and Japanese, and SEMA is a big part of the roster, and Chinese wrestlers, and they are aggressively expanding and stretching their network. So you just as you start to digest one thing that's interesting about them, something else is going to pop up, and that's something that I think others can't put a price on with their relationship with OWEs. It's that love them or hate them, they're going to be in many markets, and they're going to be making many moves. And as a promoter myself, that's exciting. That's what's needed in 2019 and going forward. There's a lot of high quality stuff, and I'm not knocking it. High quality is great. It's always great. But what's needed in wrestling at this point is something different. Fans have the access to wrestling across the globe, whether it's in New Japan or whether it's a Progress Wrestling or whether it's a small independent somewhere on the south end of the United States. So there's so much to consume. If you think the average diehard fan is consuming 5 hours of WWE product between the few brands, they're consuming Ring of Honor and New Japan and Progress Wrestling. How do you fit into their schedule if they're already consuming 10, 12 plus hours of wrestling a week before, to be blunt, you get fried? I mean, how much free time do you have, or how much is too much? So why are you in their schedule? And something that OW is doing is standing out, and that's something that I put value on.
For the longest time, Sebastian, the preconceived notion was that when it came to various groups trying to work together, it just wasn't doable because you couldn't agree on anything. Is that perception changing? Because you've always seemed to me to strike me as someone that is able to put aside whatever philosophical differences and work with a lot of groups. And this is kind of the culmination of that this summer. What has been the key to that ability to work with other groups and be able to put forward events like this?
I think, while I like to credit myself for others or discredit, it's just part of the evolution of, I wouldn't just say the wrestling game, but how the world is shifting. Over the past few years, we're seeing access to all these promotions through on-demand services. GIFs are making everything accessible. We can all talk about particular 5-star matches and be very familiar with the matches, but we've perhaps just seen one or two short clips or the GIF summary or the highlight video. And you just look at over the past few years how PWG blew up, or how fans always knew about New Japan and a lot of the Japanese wrestlers in the culture, but it was mostly in magazines and ranking systems and collecting trade tapes or stuff of that nature. But now at the tip of your finger, if there's a particular match, a particular wrestler, a particular moment in a match, you have immediate access. You will find it, whether it's free consumption or whether it's paid consumption. And I think as a result, there is not only a market that's interested in other platforms beyond your own, but they're also spending on those. Past years, perhaps people had respect for the Japanese style and they had the knowledge of the Japanese market, but were they spending on the Japanese market? And now that's what's changed, is the wrestling fan will spend across the globe, and just not across the globe, but at various levels. Before, perhaps for certain fans, the independent market was a bit of a dirty term. They take a peek at a talent or two that are destined to boom, but they keep their their key time or key money spendings on some of the larger scopes. But now independent isn't dirty. You see how people are rallying behind the PWGs, or AEW respectively is a massive promotion there, but it's the concept of fans rallying behind the underdog, or the wrestling market and even a more general market are willing and are open to consuming wrestling at all levels and in all directions. And I think that's where promoters and key players have to work with others, whether they like it or not. Before you had the ability to keep fans in a particular bubble, or at least they thought they were in a certain bubble, but now there isn't really any kind of bubble. People are being exposed, whether they want to or not, to a lot of variety, and I think that's a great thing. I think it's forced companies to be open-minded, and there's less leverage. There's no need to leverage where the larger platform or you need us. People are looking for long-term relationships over one-offs, and I think people are, they're seeing the success of other collaborations, and you don't want to fall behind on that. For us, it's I think we've had this conversation before, where eventually you can only bring in so many names, and your competitors can bring in so many names, and even if you bring a fresh face, it still has the same feel and vibe to it. Eventually, we brought in brands rather than just a wrestler, and when we brought in CZW or What Culture or Progress, that was fresh for our market. And when we used all the American buzz names, we started going after some UK talent and talent from Mexico and Japan, and that was fresh. So it's just the next step in trying to appeal to a market now that everyone, whether they are a promoter, a wrestler, or a fan, or part of the media, we have our eyes on the wrestling world. Everything is accessible. So it's an interesting time, and it allows for a lot of variety. I mean, a lot of creativity. I think it's giving opportunity, like I said, to wrestlers, fans, to promoters to be very creative, be innovative.
SummerSlam weekend, you guys are putting on what seems like 9 shows. Is it thus far?
Yeah, it's 9, and we're going to cap it at 9. Originally, we wanted 13, but we're going with quality over quantity, and we got the right partners, and everyone pretty much being international or trying to not bring their B efforts. Everyone's trying to bring their best. It's going to come at an arm and leg, and we understand that all the promotions are doing their best not to, pump those ticket prices too high. So our goal is for everyone to succeed, and it seems we have a good variety. The Summit's appealing to a women's wrestling market. The Megan Boys are such a unique spectacle, and they have their market that they target. And we have a Toronto fan base, and with OWE and Progress and WXW on board, there's a bit of everything. Even WXW, they're doing a show, Ambition, which is their shoot style tournament, which is similar to Bloodsport that they've been doing for many, many years. That's popular in Europe. So there's variety, and we don't need more than that. So hopefully it's a win-win for everyone. It's a win for those promotions. It's a win for specifically the Toronto and the Canadian market, that we can do something big in our country and in our big cities to bring fans from different countries.
In the immediate future, this weekend, you've got the Northern Tournament going down. You're running Saturday and Sunday night at the Franklin Horner Community Center. And, of course, the first round matches are going to be on the Saturday night, including Ultimo Dragon against Matt Cross. You're going to be taking on Lufisto. We'll also feature Tyson Dukes, Mike Rollins, SSB. Some excellent talent here. But night 2, Sebastian, I think the one that stands out the most, Kevin Bennett versus Choclair in a rap battle.
Yeah, he came down to a previous show of ours as a big fan of professional wrestling. There's a lot of hip-hop artists, and specifically Canadian hip-hop artists, who are massive fans of wrestling, and it was nice for him to take in our show, and he was blown away, and it was fun for him to get in the ring with Kevin Bennett and trade some insults, and the big setup is there. So there's a little bit of everything on the in this 2-day tournament. Beyond the tournament, there's a lot of different styles and fresh faces, from legends like Ultimo. Lufisto's in her retirement year and being selective about the booking she's taking, and she's been a big part of our women's roster from day one. So even Chocolier's appearances, a bit of everything. So we're really excited about what we're offering this weekend.
Does Chocolate have a finisher already planned, and is it going to be called the Northern Touch?
Yeah, I think whatever it is, it's got to be called the Northern Touch.
My last question before we let you go, Sebastian, is more kind of just a broad question. As you see a name, and I can throw out John Moxley, and it can probably apply to many over the next while. But when a guy comes out that you figure is probably, if he's doing an independent date, it's probably for top dollar. How does that make sense for the, like, what is it? What does that entail to make sure you can make back your investment? Is it something as simple as meet and greet is going to bring you in so much, and that the added tickets alone, along with just tell us a bit about kind of the economics of booking someone like a level of a John Moxley right now when he's in such high demand, so that the promoter comes out ahead at the end of it?
I'm not trying to sound negative, but I don't like to speak for other promotions, but quite often when it's those truly rare opportunities, the promotions almost always don't turn a profit or turn a small profit if it's someone like a Rey Mysterio or a Moxley, or
Right.
When AJ came out. There's several other factors that go into it, and we've been fortunate when we've targeted those people, we have seen a return. But I think a big part of it is finding additional income revenues and not just relying on the ticket sales. Stuff like meet and greets and seminars and stuff is a small aspect of it. Obviously, if people are fortunate to land sponsorship support as a result of that affiliation, that's great as well. But I think at the end of the day, although business is a business, and you should always put a priority in making money, not trying to take the passion out of wrestling, but I truly always believe that if a business is making money, then they can reinvest that money and grow the company and reach all their passion goals as well. But you got to look at the intangibles. Is this a unique opportunity that's going to take your company to the next level? You guys have followed our company in the early years when we took those gambles. Once AJ Styles was released, and instead of putting him against the local guy, Chris Hero happened to be released around the same time, we put them together. The next show, the previous show, we had Lance Storm in there with Chris Hero as well. And we capitalized on when Samoa Joe had his short turnaround there. And there was a few other key guys or key efforts, such as working with Progress Wrestling. And you got to kind of swing for the fences at times. And for us, we're in this for the long haul. And when those unique opportunities come, I'd like to believe we almost always go for it. Of course, at the end of the day, there are other factors that sometimes become challenging for us. In order for us to run TV, we got to be at particular venues. They're in high demand venues, and we have to reserve those dates ahead of time. And sometimes the venue gives us one or two options within an 8-week time span. So we got to cross our fingers that those guys are available on one of those two dates, or that we have to swallow our pride and switch venues and take the gamble with the possibility of not having an event for TV or making additional production efforts to make that work. So, I mean, for us, there's various factors, but I think mindshare is a big thing. There's so many companies doing great things and bringing in great talents and signing great talents. And at the end of the day, there's hundreds or thousands of us, and no knock on everyone, but we're not the only guys doing an A+ job. So what's going to make you stand out? And being one of those promotions that can land a Moxley, or land a Rey Mysterio, or land an AJ Styles when those opportunities present themselves, sometimes there's long-term benefits. You may not see the gate numbers from one show timeline, but we know on those big shows that we've held, we noticed that when we asked a lot of our key regular fans what show started it all out, it comes down to those 3 or big shows we had in our history. So they become regular fans, and most of those regular fans are buying VIP tickets at a premium dollar. So, and they're the ones who are investing in your merchandise, and the ones who are tweeting about you and plugging you away. So you have to take all those long-term things into consideration too. At the end of the day, it's going to be a gamble, but more often than not, I think it's a gamble for the companies that are serious. It's worth making.
I really appreciate that insight. That's really fascinating. The Northern Tournament, it's going down this weekend, Saturday night, 7:00, once again at the Franklin Horner Community Center, smash-wrestling.com. The second night, Sunday, 5 p.m. bell time for that. And smash-wrestling.com is where you can get all of that information, as well as what is going down in August, which is going to be a packed week and such an eclectic mix as well of a total different variety of styles that you guys are going to be presenting that week. So we wish you all the best this weekend, Sebastian. I'm sure we'll chat with you before August.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, guys. All the best.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sebastian.
All right. Well, that's I think you are convinced now to go check out Choclair.
Oh my God, Choclair, absolutely. Yeah, to see him in a wrestling ring for sure.
Yeah. After all those people were let down with Fabulous at WrestleMania 19, you're gonna get the payoff to a rap battle this Sunday.
Cool. Let's open it up to the
phone
lines.
Do phones for the rest.
Yeah,
I definitely want to hear from people. Whether you want to talk about the John Moxley podcast, anything going on this coming weekend.
Yep, we have Damian Abraham still to come, but for the next, I would say 13 minutes, let's just take phone calls if you guys have them. So 1-732-800-4423. Long distance charges may apply, but if you use Skype, search for Post Wrestling, and that is almost always absolutely free. So if you guys have any thoughts, come in to the post office.
Just looking ahead to coming up, we're down to 3 shows remaining in the Best of the Super Juniors. So on the A block, on Friday morning, it's going to be Shingo Takagi taking on Taiji Ishimori. The winner of that match will go to the finals. And then on Monday, it's down to Will Ospreay and Ryusuke Taguchi in the B block. So maybe we will get a prediction from Wai for what we'll get at the finals next Wednesday.
Oh, it's so hard to predict. I'm
thinking we get Takagi and Ospreay.
I mean, Shingo Takagi for sure, but who's on the other end? It's really tough to tell. Hey, caller, what do you think?
Hey, it's Paul from New Jersey.
Oh, 1 second, Paul. Give me 1 second, Paul. Let me just patch this in. A lot of technical issues, sorry, on this one. But, Paul, one more time, let us know.
Hello?
Hey there. Can you hear us?
Yeah. What would you like to chat about, Paul?
Yeah. First, I would like to say, and I won't dive too far into the political landscape, but I'm a liberal, and I can't say I'm particularly a big fan of AOC at all. Her policies, I think she's a little too far left, but I can't fathom how this is a bad thing for anybody. I watched the panel and I thought it was excellent, and I think denying things that Andreas said is a little crazy, and I think he comes from a place of communication, and I think that's what we need, and everything is open communication. So I found that to be really great. But also, the thing that's on most people's mind is the whole Moxley thing in the interview he did with Jericho. And I just wonder if you guys think, I know they wouldn't overtly do it. Do you think Renee Young faces any kind of backlash for this? Because I have to imagine it's a pretty awkward workplace for her right now.
I really don't think so, because it would be so transparent, and I think that it would do way more damage for WWE to so blatantly show their hand like something like that. I really don't feel you're going to see anything that will reflect on Renee Young, much like the same with AJ Lee, who was did not have to bear the brunt of any of CM Punk's comments. So it would certainly surprise me. I don't think that this version of WWE 10 years ago might have been very different. I really don't fathom it happening today.
Yeah, I don't see it either.
I would hope so.
I don't see it either. And I'm also just really trying to think how they would possibly punish her. What, take her off of that commentary desk where she is only there to read lines anyway?
Yeah.
I don't know what they could really do. If she was a wrestler, I think it'd be one thing, but as a commentator, I just don't really see it.
Yeah, I definitely as a wrestler, because I saw it with AEW, Peyton Royce was tweeting and Naomi and stuff, and I was like, oh, that's cool, they're being supportive, but I hope they don't get in trouble. But I just last question, I'll let you guys know. Do you think with this Moxley interview and with talent being unhappy, do you think there will be a change, or do you think Vince is going to double down? Because I'm just curious on what they're going to do going forward.
Not so much a doubling down. I do feel that they are in a situation at the moment where they are more open to adjusting the program. They're not completely. They don't look at this television viewership and the overall attitude towards their programming and are just putting their heads in the sand. I think there's an acknowledgement that there are adjustments that need to be made. So I think that now is more of a an open canvas to present those changes and maybe more ideas getting through. But do I see any wholesale changes because one performer is outspoken? I really don't. I think ultimately this is a product that it is set in its ways with its lead showrunner in Vince McMahon, that's not going to change overnight, much less over a podcast. So I really don't feel you're going to see enormous changes and anything changing the philosophy of how the show is put together. Perhaps content, you may see different ideas thrown at the wall, but I don't know if necessarily the actual execution and the process of how they put the show together is ultimately going to change for as long as you have that particular person running the show.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Thanks for taking my call. Have a good weekend, guys.
Thanks a lot, Paul. You too. It's interesting. Today was, do we have another call?
Yes, we do.
Okay,
yeah, continue your
let's
thought,
keep
though.
going.
You can continue your thought.
Well, today was the NXT conference call, and Paul Levesque is, of course, hosting these calls. And I was talking to a friend of mine before this, and we were both throwing out like how he addresses AEW, which was inevitably going to come up in this conference call, and it did, where someone was going to ask him about the throne bit or just seeing the show. And I think that the obvious answer is, I didn't see the show, or maybe I saw a clip. Ha, you laugh it off and you don't care. What would have been a really intriguing answer if you're Paul Levesque looking at this from an overall situation of how do I adjust certain people's attitudes, given that this is a call that is directed towards wrestling media and wrestling fans, that if Paul Levesque were to say, I watched the show on Saturday because I was curious to see what these guys were going to do. And he says that I thought they had a great first outing. And now it's our job to go out on Saturday and have an even better show. I think that is an answer that people scoff at, and of course was not going to be his answer. But you throw out that kind of idea that here's a guy who is inherently next in line that has an open mind to watch how others are going to present professional wrestling and not be in such a bubble to say, to either ignore the competition or to degrade them, but rather say that I'm interested to see anyone succeeding at this. And you kind of change this narrative around in terms of how the WWE is perceived to the outside audience.
I just don't see that happening. Not for a while. Not when you're, I think, in the position that the WWE is in, so much like on top of the industry. I think that type of acknowledgement.
What would your reaction to be a comment like that? Like that to me would tell me, here's a guy that, whether this is lip service or not, tells me this is a guy that has a very different view of competition, and for pure PR purposes, I think positions him very well as not being burying your head in the sand.
I mean, that would be for him, but when he has to have family dinner with, my father-in-law afterwards, how is that person going to look at it? I think it was already odd enough that he made those comments at the Hall of Fame. I think at this point, giving any type of credibility and acknowledgement to the competition is just not something I see them doing. If it is, then, I mean, they did it on Monday. If it is, I don't see it in a positive light, like a comment like that would be. But caller, do you have any thoughts?
Oh, I have many thoughts. How are you?
Oh my God! Of course, we have to get to Brandon from New Jersey. What are your thoughts, Brandon?
I just find the pro wrestling thing with punishments for, I mean, something that your spouse does that is just totally innocent, ridiculous. Like, what's Renee Young supposed to do because her husband found a better opportunity after being a free agent?
Well, let's also be fair. They haven't done anything yet. These are only things that we're talking about and proposing, and so they haven't really done anything.
I mean, they've been doing this stuff for years. It's like so stupid and it's sophomoric and immature to punish someone for. I don't even know what she did. She didn't do anything. It's dumb.
Did you not follow the Revival for the last 2 months?
Oh,
this is the industry we're talking about here. Uzi hot.
Yeah, I mean, it's bizarre. It sometimes makes you want to hate pro wrestling for the stupidity that these companies do to these guys.
Any other thoughts on the week in wrestling, Brandon?
Well, I got an MMA question real quick. John specifically? I know Way doesn't give a shit, but
no, he cares. He can't wait for Gustafson and Smith. He's been going back and forth all week.
fight, right? I mean, Gus should be the favorite. Big Gus should be the favorite. I mean, Jeff Carter, right? It looks
Yeah.
like a Jeff Carter bootleg, but yeah, I mean, Smith, he hung tough against John Jones, and he could do it again. But I just think Gus has the wrestling to wear him down.
I think Augustus is going to look very good in this fight. I feel he's going to stop Anthony Smith.
I'm looking forward to Gallegos, though. That dude's a hammer.
He is a hammer.
He's a really good fighter.
What was your MMA question, or was that it?
That was it.
Right.
I got nothing.
Brandon, we always appreciate hearing from you. We're going to move on.
I love you guys.
Thank you. All right, we move on now to Hansi. Hansi, what's going on?
What's going on, guys?
Hey, I want to chat with you.
Well, okay, go ahead. What's up?
All right, I have not purchased it yet. Have you bought the new Howard Stern book?
Oh no,
No,
dude, I have not bought the new Howard Stern book.
Is that out of protest or out of just interest?
Well, kind of both. It's like this conversation right now. It fits into professional wrestling because, like, you know how WWE fans are outraged by, you know, the complacency of the product.
Yes.
The same is basically going on with the Stern show, and it has been that way for a while, where like people feel like some of the original like cast of characters and people have been shafted away, and I unfortunately am one of those people, you know, and like, you know, just like a bunch of people like, you know, like the equivalent of Bret Hart's or CM Punk's, who like, you know, occasionally do a podcast, and like right now there's a whole exposition because Howard's always denied that he uses like fake internet accounts and all that. And recently, one of his former employees, Stuttering John,
uncovered this, didn't he? Or he talked about it on a podcast?
Yeah, he covered it, and it was like a snippet of a meeting that he had in 2013. Was him telling his employees, these A-listers are forgetting about us, and we need to remind them who we are. So make fake Twitter accounts and bombard them with tweets. So like that became like a big deal, and then Howard put his foot in his mouth because he was on The View, saying that he never used the N-word, even if it was in parody, and then it led to all his old fans like digging up every single thing he's done, from blackface to using it in parodies, and it's just people like are sick. It's like same thing with McMahon. People are sick of like these guys hiding their past and all that, and you know, and of course because I'm a former person from that show, they ask in or I'll go off on something or whatever. That's basically it. But I have not I never read the book, but the reviews from people say that, I don't know, they just don't want to hear transcripts from like, you know, liberal, like this narrative that Howard is like this liberal, like he's like it's the same thing with WWE, like they're shuffling their image again, making it seem like they've never done anything wrong and all that.
All right. Well, there. I wanted to ask you and get your thoughts on it. But what did you wanted to call in to chat about today, specific to any of the topics?
Oh, that's cool. I'll just be quick. The first thing, I know Braden and Davey, they cover NXT, but I hope you guys looked at the NXT episode, that promo package between Velveteen Dream and Tyler Breeze. I thought the narrative was really, really good about like him not being the same Tyler Breeze he was, and now Tyler Breeze has to come back and, you know, he has to prove himself. I really think you guys should check that out. But the question I wanted to ask you guys, and I'll get off after this, with SummerSlam coming up and they need a big angle, do you think that if there's a big angle being planned, even though with rewrites and all that, do you think they're going to incorporate this whole like Triple H, Vince McMahon power struggle? Because the one way that, like, listen, I know it's far-fetched, but if 10 years ago you told me Jeff Jarrett and Abyss and all these guys were, you know, going to work in WWE in some capacity, I personally think if you want to, like, counter some of the buzz of AEW, you do, like, an uprising of former TNA guys and, you know, kind of bring up. Because when competition is, like, you know, in there again, Vince McMahon will go to desperate places where he'll bring up maybe TNA or something like that. Do you guys anticipate like a big angle being shot for SummerSlam?
I think even something like you mentioned, but in the form of an NXT invasion of sorts with Triple H at the helm, you don't even have to, like, I don't even know what mentioning TNA would really do, but, NXT is still a hot commodity. I think that, is the closest rival that they have to AEW in terms of, I think, fan appreciation and loyalty to product. So something like that I think would be great, would be really interesting. Now, what's the follow-up, though? What's the end result? Are you going to follow through once you sow the seeds into the audience minds that, hey, this is our baby face that we should be leading the charge, Triple H. If you don't follow up on that at the end, you're going to have people continually look negatively upon your product, especially now that you've told even your mainstream audience who's not aware of AEW that, hey, Vince is out of touch and Triple H should be in charge.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I was gonna say NXT I mean, just because like they've been mentioning TNA a little bit more, so I just thought maybe they would have like an indie type of thing with like maybe ROH or TNA type. But I like what you're suggesting too. But I hope if they go forward with it, I hope they actually like do something that's beneficial towards the younger guard and like kind of getting rid of the old guard. But guys, thank you for taking my call. I know you guys are packed today, so I always appreciate talking to you guys. It's probably one of the highlights of my week. So all the power to you guys, man.
Anytime, Hansi. Thanks, Hansi. Thanks for the call.
One last phone call. We'll try to squeeze this in before we go to our Damian Abraham to talk about the wrestlers. But as soon as this phone call loads, Skype is our friend today. Hey, caller, what's up?
Hey, what's up, guys? It's MJ. How you doing?
MJ, what's up?
I was very wrong about the WWE stock, and unlike the chairman, I can admit when I was wrong. So that's first and foremost.
What's the price right now?
72-ish.
Right. And do you see it making any type of recovery?
Yeah, I think the Q2 earnings, when it has Mania and the Saudi show built in, like those will be really strong. So it'll get a nice bounce from that. But like in this market right now, it's probably not going to make as much a run as it did in the past. But I didn't think it would come down this much. It's down like $25.
Yeah, they've had a hit ever since over the past month. But I feel you're probably right with the second quarter report. That's going to paint a much better picture than the first did. And I think that there is still perhaps a false sense, but an optimism nonetheless that the Fox deal is going to be so transformative for the popularity and what it's going to open up for the company. And maybe there will be something to that, but I'm more hesitant than others that it's going to suddenly grow their audience on Friday nights and that it's going to open up all these other doors that Vince McMahon was really promoting on the last earnings call of like how big this deal is going to be for them. It's going to be wait and see.
I hear New York in the background, MJ.
Oh, I apologize. Well, let me real quick. That transitions me into kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about, or the other thing was, with regards to like getting to Fox and blowing out that kind of audience and all the other sponsorships and partnerships that Vince has alluded to, AEW is going to be launching around the same time on TNT, which is definitely has big reach, and you're starting to see an erosion of the audience on a week-to-week basis. And if I'm like a sponsor, you look at kind of who spends money, who's the audience that is spending money, and clearly the wrestling fan that spends money is supporting AEW. And does that present an opportunity for sponsorships and promotion on a TNT Turner broadcast station that is, it's clearly not as large as Fox, but it is also very accessible and in so many homes. And I think that's something to really look at if I'm WWE, because you're now competing against that in terms of sponsorship dollars, and that wasn't in the picture when a lot of these plans went into motion.
Yeah, it's a great point. If I'm AEW, you're doing All Out in Chicago, and I would aim that once you launch on TNT, that your next major pay-per-view, whether it's early 2020, whenever it is, I would specifically target New York, and I would want to get as many potential advertisers into that building to see that show. And I think you would, because you have to wonder that proof of concept by being in that arena, I think it would sell a lot of people beyond just whatever the television show is going to be.
MSG.
And I'd make a media blitz. Yeah, Madison Square Garden would be a big statement, and you do a media blitz where I think that's another kind of tool that they have is the level of people that they can send out to do media that will be willing to speak to these guys that very, very well spoken, that can go into many different environments and really sell the product. Your Codys, your Omegas, your like you can go down the list. Like Brandy, there are so many people on that roster that I think are very well equipped to represent their company in that kind of light. And I would do a big show in New York.
And you have Turner, and we've seen Turner. I mean, last week, Eastern Conference Finals, they have the insert clip for Double or Nothing.
Oh, yeah, they're...
You know, the pre-show was on their product, but they're
Yeah.
going to be very invested in bringing advertisers to the table in a way that Fox is going to as well. Do you think Fox heard that Moxley conversation? And I'm almost certain they did, because I know at ESPN they have interns transcribe like every podcast. I got to imagine someone from Fox transcribed that podcast and listened to it because WWE is going to be their product. That's got to be jarring to hear somebody talk about Vince in that light.
It makes you wonder, but, you know, if I'm an executive at Fox, the bottom line is just, you know, how are they doing in the ratings, right? I mean, obviously, a lot of these things are of concern. Now, you know, will they have an impact?
It ultimately comes like these instances you see where, and the Moxley interview is the latest one, but you can talk about, you know, the backlash over Saudi Arabia when there's, you know, outrage over whatever incidents happen. Like they will stomach and not bat an eye at the wrestling audience being up in arms and whatever egg is on their face. But once it reaches a sponsor level where there is a tangible problem, or you're talking about people at a network level, that's when they flinch. I don't see this one being one that ultimately, if you're a Fox executive, you're losing much sleep that there's an employee or independent contractor that left your company upset. Unless you're really following the business and can look at, you know, a trend that starts to develop. And maybe a year from now, you're seeing a lot of talent potentially leaving, and you're seeing this upstart promotion that is starting to gain a lot of traction in the market. That to me is kind of the effects of a prolonged pattern and issues. And that's when you look at kind of the foundational issues beyond just these earnings reports and what are we doing in terms of increasing our popularity and why are people leaving this company? Those are all interesting questions. I don't know if those kind of questions really are on that level of executives' minds, but we'll find out.
MJ, thank you for the call.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Take care.
Thank you. All right. One more interview to go on this edition of the Café Hangout. So each and every week here on the Hangout, we are going to be joined by Damian Abraham. Last night's episode of The Wrestlers on Wednesday focused on MVP. I thought it was a really captivating episode. So here's Damian Abraham.
And I think we should wrap up here. We should maybe sign off at this point, and then we'll play. This was a pre-recorded interview, everybody. Spoiler alert. But we'll time travel back to when we recorded this with Damian, and we'll sign off at the end of the interview.
All right. Sounds good. Back for week 2. He is Damian Abraham, The Wrestlers. Debuted last week. What has the response been like, Damian?
I'm hoping we're still on the air, John.
Well, we're 2 episodes in.
Okay, then we're good.
Or else you're not listening to this right now.
Or no one's listening to this, and no one's hearing this right now. I'm hoping the response.
Actually, that'd be great because we own you for these podcasts. Yeah. So if they stop airing them, we're just gonna have you on, and everyone's gonna come. What happened on this episode that they won't show us?
I know that's what. Maybe it'll be better for the show. Maybe the show will become like even more infamous. Maybe this show will become the new great lost match of wrestling. We need to find a new one now.
The new Holy Grail?
The new Holy Grail.
Am I alone and say the Holy Grail now is the Max Payne documentary? And I know you'll appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely the Holy
This
Grail.
trailer that surfaced in 2003 and quickly disappeared, as did Daryl Peterson,
Yes.
Max Payne.
Yes.
Never did we hear anything from him after that trailer dropped.
Didn't he do something with Vince Russo? Like a radio show?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, maybe I'm mistaken on that one, but...
Well, today we're chatting about the MVP episode, which was the changing face of wrestling. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly like a biographical portrait of MVP, but also branches off into the next generation. And it's kind of like MVP is almost playing at times the subject and others almost like a co-host to you with the likes of Sami Callihan and Shane Strickland. And I think some really endearing scenes with him talking to that younger generation and also kind of working through his own like, where am I today in pro wrestling? And I don't think he knows the answer to that. Like, what is my current spot here as I'm approaching? He's now 45 years old.
Mm-hmm. It's funny with MVP because he's actually 10 years older than he should be, because he didn't start his career till 10 years after a lot of other wrestlers would have started their career, right? Because he was in prison. So when he gets out, he's training, a little bit later. He gets his shot in the WWE a little bit later, and his shot in New Japan a little bit later. So, yeah, now he's at a sadly a point in his life where he's like, I don't know if I want to be doing this when I physically can't do it the way I want to do it. So he's looking at life after wrestling now, which is the original idea for this episode, was to do something about the idea that what do wrestlers do when the journey's over? And it's really a career that asks a lot of you. Physically, it's going to ask your body. It's going to take a lot of your mind in some cases. And then you've got to find out what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And, luckily he's had a pretty unbelievable career, but still it's like he's only, 45. Like a lot more to do with your life.
Did you expect that, through following his story, you were able to branch out to so many other facets of professional wrestling? I mean, through this episode, we got to see him not only, talk about his WWE New Japan experience, but also seeing him wrestle in front of 30, 40 people at that indie show. And then even onto producing it at MLW.
Yeah, we kind of knew, but this was sequentially one of the last episodes we shot. And by this point, we were pretty comfortable being around wrestling and shooting wrestling. And also we knew a lot of the players. Like we had been, if you watch throughout the series, you'll see Sami Callihan a lot because that's just the nature of wrestling. Yeah. And then also if you look in this episode too, you'll see Darby Allin in the background of one part. You'll see Mia Yim. You'll see a lot of people that come up later on in the series.
Were you ever crossing over, shooting for different episodes, or was it pretty? Oh, it was. So.
Yeah. There were some times where it was actually a bunch of really fortunate situations where we didn't have footage of certain people wrestling, and then we'd show up at a show and be like, oh my gosh, yeah, you're on this card. That's incredible. Or someone got on the card last minute. There are a lot of fortunate things like that happened. But yeah, you wind up cross shooting for some stuff. There's less of it than I thought because, we actually shot MVP wrestling Rob Van Dam, and there's very little of that footage in here. And it was a great match at PCW that went all over the building. But it was very early on, and we wound up not using the footage for this thing because we got enough with MVP during the shows we were at with them.
It's also evident you have a subject in MVP that was it's just such a world of difference when you can tell someone wants to be profiled and be open as much as he was. And I think that's like with Gabe Sapolsky, I think it's a major trust factor that I'm going to allow a camera crew to not just shoot me and my story, but my child. I think that's a huge trust factor to be able to have, and for him to be able to take you to all these different places and relive his entire story. It just seemed he was very much willing to share his story and be critically honest at times, whether it was steroid use, whether it was drug use, whether it's, his own fears of his mortality, saying, hey, I'm in my mid-40s. This is when wrestlers can typically pass away.
Yeah, he's someone that I've been lucky enough to interview for a long time. And Gabe was another person I'd known for a long time. So I'm trading on trust in a lot of these cases. And once again, I'm really lucky that the filmmakers, Nathan and Jeff and everyone else on the crew got it because at the end of the day, these people have my home phone number. MVP's been to my house. I know these people. If I let them down, I'm not just letting down the subject of a documentary. I'm letting down a friend in a lot of cases. So yeah, there was a lot of pressure on that. But I think, shooting with Vice helped. Them seeing other stuff that I had done and knowing these people too. Knowing, when MVP and I sit down and do this interview, I've interviewed him before this for 7 hours for different things that we've done together. So, it's like sitting down with a friend and just chatting. And he was incredibly open.
Did you find much, concern from any of your subjects that you've interviewed about perhaps worrying that this was going to be some type of expose that, many wrestling documentaries have been in the past? Yeah,
I think definitely in other places, Japan, Mexico, America, once again, because a lot of the episodes we're doing were people I knew. But there's still a feeling out process. When you show up for the first time and you've got these cameras there, a lot of these people are very used to dealing with cameras, but they're in, a hard camera, and then there's a roaming camera kind of place. They're not just following them around backstage. So, but once again, I'm trying to think through all the episodes, There are definitely people that said, "Don't film me. I don't want to be filmed."
Well, I found like one of the most interesting scenes from my perspective was MVP is letting you in on, like, he is leaving no stone unturned, but the breaking point to stop filming is the finish has been changed on the MLW show, and me and Sammy have to talk about the new finish. I was like, that is the third rail that we cannot touch.
Yeah, and that also was...
And I think that was also more deference because he's realizing Sammy hasn't been told about this, and he is not trying to do a segment here where gotcha on camera with your reaction. I think that was more out of respect to Sammy. He's not been clued into the changes.
Well, and there was also the fact that it was Sammy had to go to Japan, like 2 days later for MLW or for New Japan Pro Wrestling. And so he wasn't going to be there for the next show. So it changed on the fly. But that was like MVP's like, yeah, you guys got to turn off the camera now for a second. And so it's like, okay. Yeah, and it's because everyone's been so open and honest with us every other time. We're not going to betray their trust and like, okay, keep the camera rolling, just keep it down. Because at the end of the day, I think like a lot of what I want to do with this documentary is treat it like like we're doing something about magic. Like I don't necessarily want to reveal how the magician does all their tricks. I want to show the culture that goes into their lives, but I don't want to show you the actual breakdown of how the rabbit gets into the hat because you don't need to know it to enjoy it like that. And we can all find that stuff out anyway.
You mentioned how this episode, the premise was sort of following somebody on their path to retirement. And what were some of those conversations you had with MVP prior that, kind of set you on this idea?
We had been talking for a while for different things. Like, I'd interviewed him on the podcast a couple times and just knowing like how his body was feeling and just him talking about like, there's a wear and tear. Like that's the thing about wrestling. Like, yeah, it's not quote unquote real in the sense that someone's not laying in as hard as they can with that shot. But at the same time, everything hurts. There's not a single thing you do in that ring that doesn't, cause a little bit of trauma to your body. So even if you're like MVP and manage to get through with like, not a lot of real crazy injuries, just that wear and tear on your back and your joints is just, I can't even imagine, I feel it from just playing on stage. So, just knowing where his head was at and him just saying straight up, like, I'm not going to be doing this at 50, like I really kind of have a few more years and then I'm done. But, I understand with him too, the hesitation where you don't want to put a hard date on it because this is what you do for a living, and it's, even if you do have a little bit of a nest egg saved up, like look at that house he's living in. That can't be a cheap lifestyle.
Yeah. I also appreciated the fact that he was, it's obvious by his, his various statements that this used to be a tough business, that he really doesn't necessarily agree with where the business has gone, but also acknowledging that this is through a 45-year-old's eyes that came up in a different era, and that if he wants to be part of this industry, he has to evolve that thinking. And I think that's, a bit of a source of conflict for him, understanding that I think if he could, this business would be different in his eyes, but it's also that's not what it is.
Yeah. No, and you can see the people he came up with, right? Like Prime Time is like one of the nicest human beings I've ever met in my life, but you can tell that he's a hard trainer, and he's from that old school of wrestling where you break into the business, and that when we go to the school and we meet that guy, Dave Johnson, who was one of the Blackjacks who passed away shortly after filming as well. He was, the stories he would tell us were crazy, the stories they would tell us about what they used to do to wrestlers when they were training. It was like, you can't get away with that now. And I'm like, yeah, thankfully.
Yeah. I was like, maybe with good reason, like evolution can sometimes be a good thing, but there's also, there's those that came out of that can say, I was better for it. I mean, everyone's going to have a different experience.
He also has and Dave Johnson has a story where the Blackjacks went to Japan. They had a match, and it's like, I can't remember all the details of it right now, but he had a tape of it. And in the match, they get shot on by their opponents. Their opponents go out there, and it's not the match that they had, thought they were going to be getting into. And they knock out Dave pretty early on in the match, but they take his partner over and they smash his head into the guardrail, and they're like crushing it between the fence and the stuff. It's like an All Japan match. Wow. So his argument is, this is a hard business, and you have to be hard because sometimes the person across the ring from you isn't going to be into doing business and might try and kill you. And so he's like, that's why I'm hard on these people, because their opponent might be way harder on them one time. And, fair enough, fair play. But at the same time, yeah, it's a changing environment. And I think the first episode, that school, A.R. Fox's school, and just like what an inclusive, amazing place that wrestling school was, and just, all sorts of kids there. And not that there wasn't an inclusive kind of vibe at this other wrestling school, but at the same time, it was just a very less kind of jovial, laid back kind of wrestling experience. It was a lot more closer to what the old school, I guess, of wrestling training was. Like MVP makes that guy do squats, and that guy did do squats, not for an hour, but he went over and did his squats. And so
I wanted to ask you about the scene with him and his son, who is an adorable child.
Yeah, incredible kid.
I always find it interesting whenever, to see you, and also in the Jun Kasai episode that's to come, you ask if, would you see your child getting into this? And I would say, like, most of the time, if not almost always, you hear them say, no, I don't want my child getting into it. And to me, that's almost like them saying, I obviously love this business, I love doing all this, but I wouldn't want to put somebody else through it. It's almost like a tint of like, I don't want to say regret, but more like, this is my sacrifice that I'm willing to put out there. I don't think other people should or could even do it.
Yeah, definitely. Like, well,
Phoenix brings it up later in a future episode too.
Yeah. No, I think every parent, like, I can't think of a single parent that's like, I can't wait to watch them grow up and walk in my footsteps and start to wrestle. And I think it's because they feel that pain, that constant pain. Like it is like a.
And what's the success level? I mean, what you put into it doesn't necessarily. It's not like this transaction that I will sacrifice my body and in turn I'll be taken care of and my kids' lives will be better. It's like, no, you could give your body for this and be broke at the end of this and never get your big contract. Like it's an enormous gamble.
Well, look how many people selflessly, but like kind of gave to MVP for him to become a star. Like how many people you've never heard of that were key wrestlers on his journey that, trained him or wrestled him. Like these are the people that just didn't get to the level he got. And MVP's like the one person, and it was awesome being at this school, them being like, yeah, we never charged him ever because we knew he was going to make it. And we always wanted to see him make it. We all believed in him. And he did. Here's this guy who had all the gifts and was able to apply them. And it's sad it had to be later because of the prison sentence. But I think that's amazing that WWE never. And I think in general, you get these characters, and we love wrestling characters, but then you hear the real stories, and you're like, well, the real story is actually kind of more interesting than the character.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm assuming the whole PG thing probably,
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting question that, MVP is. I remember first interviewing him, I want to say 2007, right after he had come in, and we ended up talking about it. And he told me that it's like, I serve my time, but it's a scarlet letter that I still have to wear. And it's not like, it's just like I've paid my debt to society. And I would question if today MVP is 29 and in the same position he was in the mid 2000s, is WWE signing someone like that?
Yeah.
And it's very much like, if you have that history, like I'm glad he is speaking out about this, and it's a real conversation people have to have, because if we are in a society now that rehabilitation is not going to be acknowledged, are we saying rehabilitation is not possible? That you commit this act and you're going to serve a finite sentence of 9.5 years, but your real sentence is a lifetime one, that you are now disqualified from certain elements of being part of society.
It still falls him around. He's still, like, if he applies for, like, he actually did sell that house, right? And he applied for an apartment to get an apartment, and they had an ex-con box, and he got turned down for a bunch of places with millions and millions and millions of dollars in the bank from this house sale, not million, I don't know the actual finances of it, but like money in the bank, and able to, theoretically walk into any apartment and just say, hey, here's first and last, I'm going to move in. But he still has to click that box, like, are you a convicted felon? And then, and here we are, years removed, like international fame removed, and it's still something that is very real for him. And it's, when do you get past it? Like, when are you rehabilitated? Like, how many years have to go by? And it's something, I guess, as a society we kind of have to answer, because he is, you talk about him being an anomaly in wrestling, like in for an ex-convict to come out of prison, having gone in at such a young age, and to wind up in the position he's in now, that's got to be, 1 in a million, right? Like, literally, probably something like
just to even make it in the business, I would say those chances are very slim. But to come from his background as well, it's insane. Talk a bit about Shane Strickland and your interactions with him.
Shane is one of the best wrestlers in the world, and he can do every single style. And you see that match versus Ricochet, which
that's the first MLW show they had back.
The very first MLW show, and I think that's like a classic of this era. Like, there's just so much stuff in that match that just looks ridiculous. Like, even watching it back, and I remember being in the locker room watching it with everyone on the monitor, and just people being like, "Oh my God!" Like, there's that scene, that move where Strickland, I think, jumps off the ropes and he gets caught with Ricochet's drop kick, and it's just like how the timing is just incredible. And I think, Shane Strickland's another guy who comes up later on in the series. We see him again doing other types of wrestling, and he's just someone who can go all around the world and do every single style, and is just so emblematic of like the new breed of professional wrestler, which is someone that, is like a Joey Janela that you can put in a ring with, like, a Japanese veteran, or you can also put in the ring with MJF. You can also put him in the ring to put on some crazy comedy match. Like, these people can do everything because they grew up watching everything. They grew up on YouTube wrestling. They grew up on, if not DVD wrestling before that. And so they've seen all the best stuff from all over the world, and they want to put it all in there.
Has MVP watched the episode?
Yeah.
And how did he feel?
He liked it. He definitely is. I think, I don't want to put words into his mouth, but I think he was pretty happy with how he's still talking to me, put it that way.
If you had a situation that you were really, let's just say hypothetically, you watch this and you're really happy with it, and he, for whatever reason, hated it, would that ultimately alter your opinion of it? Or could you be able to separate that this might not be, it might be uncomfortable for the subject, and it doesn't have to be MVP, but ultimately this was a great story and I'm glad it came out the way it did. Do you think that you can separate that from just the opinion of those directly involved?
I think for this one, maybe not, like certainly for other things I've done, I can definitely separate, be like, well, this is why it had to be done. But I think this would be one because of the story we were telling, where if he's like, you completely missed who I am, I would be like, wow, I maybe I should go back and rewatch this, and I think this, like if one of no one's come back and said they hated it yet. There's definitely probably people that don't like it as much as, I thought they would. Or
Kota Ibushi is just going to be furious.
My God. Well, that would break my heart. Then I'll scrap the series. I got to take it down. But also, like, I would have nothing to stop them, right? Sorry, I'd have no recourse. Like, if they were like, this sucks, you got to change it, I'd be like, well, I'm kind of just like a cog in the machine, like I really, there's this filmmakers and there's the editors and there's all these other people that are in the pros, what it's like. And so,
have you ever been the recipient of that?
Definitely for cannabis stuff. Oh, tons. And we've also, like, cannabis stuff is like, that's why I love doing the wrestling stuff, because ultimately we're all driving in the same direction. With the cannabis stuff, there's a little bit more journalism kind of to what you're doing, in the sense that you got to be a little more critical. And there's like times where you're filming someone and they're like, well, I'm going to jail now. Thanks. And it's like, oh, fuck. Okay, well, let's see how we can try and fix this, or, not fix it, but like, because you were dealing with stuff, especially at that point, like people that were really criminalized for the cannabis thing. With the wrestling stuff, you're just dealing with people, Cage match, there were definitely a lot of people. When we did the Tournament of Death, we did the Tournament of Death documentary, there were definitely people afterwards that were not happy with it. And we ran into some other wrestlers
that are featured in the documentary.
That were featured in the documentary or weren't featured in the documentary in a lot of cases. Like a lot of people that were like, oh, I don't know if you really represent.
Don't tell me Kobayashi was saying I came off in a poor light there. You didn't understand the essence of the Kenzon.
No, that was the Jeff Cannonball. Jeff Cannonball loved his part in ours, the Kenzon part with Jeff Cannonball. Kobayashi.
He had the bolt that was nailed into his. Oh God. Yeah, I don't want to relive that thing.
No. When we get to Japan and then Jeff and Nathan really want to do another deathmatch documentary this time around. So I think, I really like that we got another crack at that, and trying to tell what deathmatch wrestling is. But we'll get into that in a future episode. But yeah, like, I'm intrigued to see what Booker T thinks. There's a lot of people that I don't think as far as I know, haven't seen it yet. So I'm intrigued to see what they think too, because getting Booker T in it, going to meet Booker T was crazy. I was starstruck at that point. Like, I'd met a lot of my favorite wrestlers and stuff, but like,
it comes through, Damian.
It's Booker T, like I cannot be impressed.
Next week you are going to Japan and talking to the ladies of Stardom.
Yeah, which is one of the best episodes I think in the series. Mayu,
you get to go to Rossi Ogawa's house.
We went to Ogawa's house, and that's the thing about also, like when you go to someone's house and you realize, oh my gosh, they're a fan. And when you go to Ogawa's house and you see how much of his life is dedicated to the love of pro wrestling, you're like, oh wow. I think that's the other thing. Stardom, I had a lot of preconceived notions about it going in. I thought I knew what Stardom was about. I thought I understood it, but I did not at all. And I think going there and kind of getting a chance to document it and meet the women, the wrestlers of Stardom, I really now have a much more deeper appreciation for it. So yeah, this was definitely the episode that I think I had the most preconceived notions about what I was going to see that were kind of completely shattered afterwards.
I would say like after these first two episodes, the series starts to become a lot more international.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the goal was originally trying to make something that was really international, because I think going all over the world, the only thing you'd see in all these places, you'd see Coca-Cola, you'd see, Disney stuff, and then you'd see wrestling. Like that's the only international, like I wouldn't hear the same music in Bolivia that I'd hear in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Maybe Rihanna. Rihanna you hear in a lot of places, but you'd see wrestling.
Well, that's the WWE. The WWE is the Rihanna of wrestling.
But even the WWE, you'd always see, sometimes you'd see the WWE, but then sometimes you just see a local manifestation of professional wrestling. And so, when we started doing this show, the idea of trying to present it as this global art form was kind of the key to the thesis, I think.
These have been really enjoyable to do, Damian. So thanks so much.
Thanks for having me,
we'll
guys.
hook up next week to chat about the Stardom episode that I think a lot of people are going to enjoy, and getting to see, hear from people that you've probably never heard from, at least in this light, like Mayu Iwatani, Rossi Ogawa, and many others that you spoke with. So that is next week, Wednesday night, Viceland. Tune into The Wrestlers.
Oh, and Zaya Brookside next week too. Robbie Brookside's daughter. Got it in there.
Oh, really?
Got it in there.
Enough.